Welcome to the deep dive. We've got a really fascinating topic today based on sources you shared with us. We're taking a deep dive into irritable bowel syndrome, or IBS.
That's right. And the material we're working from, well, it includes excerpts from a book called Irritable Bowel Syndrome, Navigating Your Way to Recovery by Dr. Megan Errol and Professor Christine Dancy, plus some other context you sent over.
Yeah, and our mission, as always, is to unpack all this, pull out the key insights, maybe some surprising bits, and give you a really clear picture of IBS. You know, what it is, how it's understood, diagnosed, managed, and what it's actually like to live with.
Exactly. And importantly, we're sticking strictly to the information you provided in these sources.
Think of it as us filtering the essential knowledge from your materials, just for you.
Precisely. Cutting through the noise.
Okay, let's dive right in then. According to this material, what are the absolute core symptoms, the things that really define IBS?
Well, the sources focus on three main things. First up is abdominal pain. And it's not just a minor thing. It can range from pretty mild right up to severe. Often it's linked somehow to having a bowel movement. And interestingly, the sources note that for women, this pain can even fluctuate with their menstrual cycle.
Got it. So significant pain is central. What about, the bathroom habits themselves?
That's number two. A definite change in bowel habits. It's less about whether someone is typically, say, constipated or prone to diarrhea.
Right.
It's more about a shift from their normal pattern. So someone who's always been regular might suddenly develop chronic diarrhea, or the other way around. That change is a really key indicator.
Okay, the change itself. And the third core symptom?
Urgency. A sudden, really compelling need to use the toilet. And this can affect anyone, whether they mostly have diarrhea or constipation, or even if it alternates. The sources really stress how difficult this one is, partly because of the significant fear of not making it to a toilet in time, potential incontinence.
Wow, yeah, that sounds incredibly challenging. The source material also makes a point about how our understanding of IBS it's really changed over time, hasn't it?
Absolutely. Historically, it went by names like spastic colon or irritable colon syndrome.
Which kind of implies it was just about muscle spasming in the gut, right?
Exactly. And for a long time, it was often called a functional disorder.
I remember hearing that term. It sort of meant, well, they couldn't find anything physically wrong on tests.
Precisely. And because doctors couldn't always pinpoint a clear physical cause with the tools they had, it was often, and really quite unfairly, put down solely to psychological factors.
The whole it's all in your mind thing?
Yeah.
Yeah.
But the sources are very clear. That old way of thinking, it's really shifted.
Good.
Yes, a major takeaway here is that experts now see IBS as multi-causal. It's understood as this complex interplay of neurological, psychological, physiological, and biological factors. The book explicitly says it is not just all in the mind.
So stress is definitely part of the picture, but it's not as simple as you feel stressed, so your gut acts up.
Right. It works through these much more complicated neuropsychophysiosomatic pathways. It's about how the brain, the nervous system, bodily functions, biological elements like inflammation or even gut bacteria.
Yeah.
How they all talk to each other and influence the whole system.
Okay. And the sources also stress, don't they, that before you land on an IBS diagnosis, it's crucial to rule out other conditions with similar symptoms.
Oh, absolutely vital. Coeliac disease is a big one mentioned. That's an autoimmune reaction to gluten, causes inflammation in the intestines. And the symptoms, pain, bloating, diarrhea, or constipation, fatigue, they overlap hugely with IBS. Diagnosis needs blood tests and usually a gut biopsy.
Okay, what else? Lactose intolerance must be common too.
Yes, that's when you lack the enzyme lactase to break down milk sugar. Again, very similar symptoms. Pain, bloating, diarrhea, diagnosed often through an elimination diet or maybe a hydrogen breath test or a stool test.
And then there's one I found quite surprising mentioned, endometriosis. You wouldn't immediately connect that with gut problems.
It's fascinating, isn't it? Endo is a gynecological condition where tissue like the womb lining grows elsewhere. Sometimes that elsewhere is around the bowel, which can cause pain, fatigue, painful bowel movements, sometimes because scar tissue adhesions kind of bind things together. But here's the really interesting bit from the source.
Yeah.
A study found that 7% of women who were eventually diagnosed with endometriosis had previously been told they just had IBS.
7%, that's significant.
It is. And many of those women actually found their so-called IBS symptoms cleared up once the endometriosis was properly treated.
Wow. That really drives home the potential for misdiagnosis. And the source also mentions the average time to diagnose endometriosis is what, 7.5 years?
Incredible, isn't it? Nearly a decade potentially struggling with symptoms attributed to IBS before getting the right answer.
It definitely shows why thorough investigation is so important. Okay, so back to the causes of IBS itself. That multi-causal idea is key.
Right. It's rarely, if ever, just one thing. Not just diet, not just stress.
They interact.
Exactly. The sources suggest these factors combine, often in someone who might already have a genetic predisposition. Apparently, having a relative with IBS makes you 2 to 3 times more likely to develop it yourself.
Interesting.
Other potential triggers mentioned are changes in the gut bacteria, the microbiota, maybe some low-grade inflammation, issues with gut hormones, or even having had a bad bout of gastroenteritis in the past.
And the book is quite upfront that even experts might disagree on exactly how important each factor is, or the best way to treat it.
Which makes sense, really, given the complexity.
Yeah. And you mentioned the body-brain-mind connection earlier. The sources really dig into the mechanics of this, don't they?
They do, and it's absolutely central to understanding IBS. You've got the gut itself, this 9-meter-long tube, and it actually has its own nervous system embedded right there in the gut wall.
The enteric nervous system, or ENS.
That's the one, sometimes called the little brain.
Okay, the little brain in the gut. And it talks to the big brain in our head.
Constantly, via what's called the brain-gut axis, or BGA, and that communication flows both ways.
Right, not just typed down.
No. And this system is also intimately linked with the hypothalamus pituitary adrenal axis, the HPA axis. That's your body's main stress response system.
Okay, BGA and HPA. So how does stress actually plug into all this?
Well, think of it like your body's alarm system. Stress can trigger a really fast response via the main brain, the central nervous system. That's your classic fight or flight. Adrenaline gets released.
Like if you hear footsteps behind you on a dark night.
Exactly, that kind of immediate reaction. But then there's a slower, more sustained response that works through the HPA axis. This releases cortisol, your main stress hormone.
Which is useful short-term, presumably.
Yeah.
Mobilizes energy.
Yes, but if the stress is chronic, if it just keeps going, that HPA system stays switched on, constantly pumping out these hormones.
And that's how it affects the gut in IBS.
That's the connection the sources make. This continuous stress signaling down to the gut can actually lead to dysregulation of the whole HPA system. And crucially, it can contribute to a low-grade inflammatory response right there in the intestinal wall.
Inflammation.
Yeah.
So actual physical changes.
Yes. And that physical inflammation can then directly trigger symptoms like pain and diarrhea.
So the big takeaway here is, stress isn't just making you feel bad psychologically. It's causing a real physical chain reaction in your gut through these specific hormonal and inflammatory pathways.
Precisely. It's a physiological mechanism. And another really key player in this whole gut ecosystem, according to the sources, is the gut microbiota.
Right, the trillions of microorganisms living in our intestines. Bacteria, viruses, fungi.
Yep. And the sources really emphasize that mostly they're good for us. Essential even. They help the gut lining work properly, help us absorb nutrients, influence how the gut moves, and they're deeply involved in our immune system and how we respond to inflammation.
So they're like essential partners in keeping things running smoothly. What happens if that partnership gets disrupted?
That's a state called dysbiosis. And the sources suggest that a disturbance in this balance may be caused by antibiotics or laxatives or changes after a gut infection, could be a contributing factor in conditions like IBD and IBS.
Which implies that maybe changing the microbiota could be part of the solution.
Potentially, yes. That's certainly an area of active research and interest highlighted in the material.
It really paints a picture of incredible complexity, doesn't it? How interconnected everything is. Okay, let's shift gears a bit. What do the sources say about the actual experience of living with IBS? Beyond the physical stuff, what are the big challenges people face?
Well, a really powerful theme that comes through loud and clear is the stigma and the lack of understanding.
Because it's often an invisible illness.
Yeah.
Right, you might look perfectly fine.
Exactly. And that can lead to what the sources call low medical legitimization. It's not seen as serious, perhaps, compared to conditions with more obvious outward signs, like cancer.
And that lack of validation must be incredibly isolating and difficult.
It really can be. The sources mention a study where a predominant theme was a sense of stigma. People feeling like they aren't believed, sometimes even by doctors, and that can massively increase feelings of depression and anxiety.
I could absolutely see that.
Yeah.
And the sheer unpredictability of the symptoms must be a huge factor, too.
Oh, it's cited as a major, major problem. The book quotes one study talking about living with unpredictability and how that makes people feel out of control, constrained, and dependent.
Yeah.
I mean, imagine the constant low-level fear of sudden, urgent diarrhea striking when you're miles from a toilet or stuck in a meeting or on public transport.
The material includes some really moving personal stories. There's one quote: "The IBS affects so many parts of my life. Family occasions and my enjoyment of them. Holidays when I'm in pain and my intimate relationship. I lose my energy, my motivation. It is very frustrating." That really paints a picture.
It shows how it just seeps into every corner of life,
Mhm.
including work.
Right. The sources suggest employers should make reasonable adjustments. Things like maybe making sure your desk is near the toilets, or offering some flexibility with breaks or start times, or how sick leave is handled.
Yeah, and while you don't always have to disclose, understanding your rights is important. Discrimination based on a disability is illegal.
And IBS can legally be classed as a disability.
Yes, under the UK Equality Act 2010, it can be if it meets the criteria having a substantial and long-term negative effect on your day-to-day activities. In very severe cases that prevent work, people might qualify for benefits like PIP in the UK, though there are specific conditions around age and duration.
We talked about stress earlier, but the sources make an interesting distinction. It's often the fear of the symptoms themselves that causes the most stress.
That's a really crucial point they highlight. One quote puts it bluntly: it's not stress, it's fear.
Mhm.
The fear of a flare-up, fear of pain, fear of urgency, fear of incontinence. That fear becomes a massive stressor in itself.
Triggering the body's stress response.
Exactly, which can then, ironically, make the physical symptoms worse. It becomes this really vicious cycle.
And that constant stress and fear must lead to fatigue and sleep issues.
Definitely. Dealing with symptoms day in, day out is exhausting. And then the worry often keeps people awake at night. The sources explicitly state that IBS symptoms are worse when sleep quality or quantity are worse.
So poor sleep makes IBS worse, and IBS makes sleep worse. Another cycle.
Yes. And lack of social support is even linked in the sources to more disturbed sleep. This fatigue hits everything. The material notes that people often prioritize keeping up appearances at work, so it's their home life and personal energy that suffer first.
And it's not just about feeling tired from lack of sleep, is it?
No, the chronic stress and worry of dealing with a long-term illness also have direct biological effects that contribute to fatigue. And poor sleep itself is linked to all sorts of other health problems and can increase those inflammatory markers we talked about. There's a quote from someone called Danielle saying she hadn't had a decent night's sleep without medication in probably 10 years or more.
God, that's tough. Really highlights the toll it takes. So, okay, if someone suspects they have IBS, how does a diagnostic process usually start, according to these sources?
It typically begins with a visit to the GP. They'll ask a lot of detailed questions about the symptoms, the urgency, feelings of incomplete emptying, the nature of the pain, any mucus. And they often use something called the Rome criteria.
Those are standardized guidelines based on symptom patterns.
Exactly. If the symptoms are quite new, the GP might suggest just monitoring things for a bit, maybe keeping a symptom diary, and then coming back. An actual IBS diagnosis usually requires symptoms to have been present for around 6 months or so.
And they might try some initial medications.
Yes, possibly something simple for diarrhea or constipation, or, interestingly, sometimes a low-dose antidepressant.
Even if you're not depressed.
Right. Because some antidepressants, particularly the older tricyclic ones, TCAs, can have a separate effect of calming the bowel, reducing pain sensitivity, and helping with sleep, though the sources do caution that some types can actually irritate the stomach for certain people.
Now, one tool that keeps coming up in the sources as being incredibly useful is keeping a symptom diary.
Absolutely crucial. Nicola is quoted saying, "Keep a regular journal. It will all be useful in helping you manage the condition on an ongoing basis." It's presented as probably the single best way to start identifying your personal patterns and triggers.
So what kind of details should you aim for in this diary?
Be really specific. Record the type of bowel movement. The source mentions the Bristol stool chart as a helpful tool for describing consistency. Note down if you feel like you haven't fully emptied your bowels or if you had any accidents or near misses. Detail your pain. Where is it? What does it feel like? Sharp, dull, burning, cramping. List any other gut symptoms too, bloating, burping, wind, even noting if it's particularly smelly, as that can sometimes be a clue.
And tracking food, drink, medications.
Everything. What meds you took, including dose and strength, even supplements or herbal remedies. And for food and drink, the source says be as detailed as possible. Write down everything you consume, the time you consumed it, and maybe even why you ate or drank it then.
Why? Like, what's the thinking there?
Well, the example given is someone who routinely drinks coffee on an empty stomach first thing, not because they enjoy it, but for the get up and go effect, because they're actually scared to eat anything solid before leaving the house due to IBS fears. That kind of detail reveals eating habits driven by anxiety, not just preference, which is really useful information.
That's a great point. What else goes in the diary?
Your feelings and stress levels. How did you feel when you woke up during the day? Before bed, note any specific worries related to your IBS, any daily pressures, work stress, relationship issues, maybe even major life events like bereavement.
And optional extras.
Could include exercise, any other illnesses or medications you're taking. Antibiotics are specifically mentioned as gut disruptors.
Yeah.
Smoking habits. And for women, tracking their menstrual cycle is often really helpful.
How long do you need to keep this detailed diary for?
The recommendation seems to be about 2 to 4 weeks. That's usually long enough to start seeing patterns emerge.
And the benefit. Why go to all this trouble?
It gives you and your doctor invaluable clues. It moves beyond guesswork. It helps tailor treatments much more effectively. And, crucially, it empowers you with knowledge to manage future flare-ups better. There's a quote from Liz who said that before her diagnosis, she just assumed her constant bloating and cramps were somehow normal. The diary and diagnosis finally helped her connect the dots.
Yeah, it sounds like it's about taking back some control through information. Okay, besides the diary, what kinds of tests might a doctor order to help rule out those other conditions we talked about?
A stool test is pretty standard. It checks for various things: color, consistency, hidden blood, parasites, specific bacteria. It helps rule out infections or conditions like inflammatory bowel disease, IBD.
And blood tests.
Usually a full blood count, FBC. This can pick up general signs of inflammation in the body, like raised ESR or CRP levels, or signs of infection from white blood cell counts.
Food allergy testing is mentioned too.
Yes, but the source is careful to distinguish this. It's talking about tests for true allergies, the kind involving IgE antibodies and histamine release. Things like skin prick tests or specific blood tests. This is different from the food intolerances or sensitivities that are much more common in IBS, which don't involve that specific allergic immune reaction.
That's a really important clarification. What about the procedures where they look inside with cameras? Endoscopies.
Right. Several types are mentioned. A sigmoidoscopy uses a thin, flexible tube with the camera to look at just the lower part of the large bowel and the rectum.
What are they looking for there?
Things like polyps, inflammation, or suspicious growths. It's often done in a hospital clinic or even a GP surgery. It usually takes maybe 10-20 minutes and often doesn't require heavy sedation. They pump in some air or gas to inflate the bowel, which the source says can cause some discomfort or an urge to go to the toilet. They can take small tissue samples, biopsies, or remove polyps during the procedure.
Okay. Then there's a barium enema.
That's an X-ray examination of the entire large bowel. You need to take strong laxatives beforehand to clear everything out. Then, during the X-ray, they introduce a contrast liquid called barium, and usually some air, into the bowel via the rectum.
And that shows up on the X-ray.
Yes, it outlines the bowel wall, helping to spot things like tumors, diverticula, or areas of inflammation. It's done in an X-ray department, possibly with mild sedation. The source notes that a normal result simply means no obvious structural disease was found at that time, but it doesn't rule out IBS or other functional issues.
Gotcha. And then there are the more extensive endoscopies, upper endoscopy and colonoscopy.
Right. An upper endoscopy involves swallowing a scope that goes down your esophagus to look at your stomach and the first part of your small intestine, the duodenum, usually done with numbing spray at the back of the throat or sedation.
And a colonoscopy.
That uses a longer scope to examine the entire length of the large intestine, right up to where it joins the small intestine. This usually involves sedation or painkillers. It takes a bit longer, maybe 30-35 minutes. Again, they're looking for polyps, cancer, inflammation. They pump in air, which can cause cramping afterwards, and they can take biopsies or remove polyps. Liz is quoted again saying she didn't remember much of hers because of the sedation.
Right. So you go through all this, other things are ruled out, you get the IBS diagnosis. Now, what does the source material say about actually managing it? Is there a cure discussed?
No, the material is quite clear that there isn't really a single cure mentioned in these sources. The focus is very much on management finding ways to control the symptoms and improve quality of life.
And it takes patience, right? Because what works for one person might not work for another.
Exactly. And symptoms can even change over time for the same person. That's where the IBS diary becomes useful again for tracking whether a particular treatment is actually making a difference for you.
Okay, so what are some of the medical treatments mentioned?
Well, the sources group them a bit. There are some medications that can potentially help with multiple symptoms. We mentioned tricyclic antidepressants, TCAs, like mitriptyline earlier. They can help calm the bowel, relieve pain, aid sleep, though they can be sedating. SSRIs, another class of antidepressant, are also mentioned.
And things specifically for cramps.
Yes, antispasmodics.
Mm.
Drugs like buscopan, the source, mentions a specific IBS relief version, are designed to reduce the muscle spasms in the gut that cause pain and cramps. They don't typically target constipation or diarrhea directly, just the spasm element. Peppermint oil, often in capsule form, is also highlighted as being helpful for spasms.
What about specifically for constipation?
First things first, the sources say, drink enough water. Simple, but important. Then there are laxatives, but with a note of caution, tolerance can develop, so they're not usually recommended for indefinite long-term use without medical guidance.
Different types of laxative.
Yes, osmotic laxatives, like lactulose or magnesium citrate, work by drawing more fluid into the bowel. The source mentions a risk of electrolyte imbalance if these are used for too long or at high doses. Then there are PEG solutions, brand names like Movicol or Macrogol in the UK, Miralax or Glycolax in the US. These are apparently increasingly favored because the PEG molecule isn't absorbed by the body, and they often contain balanced electrolytes, making them potentially safer for longer-term management under advice.
Okay. And for diarrhea, any specific treatments mentioned?
It notes that strenuous exercise, like long-distance running, can sometimes trigger diarrhea runner's trots, but moderate exercise is generally fine and encouraged. For managing diarrhea, paradoxically, bulk-forming agents like ispagula husk, psyllium, can sometimes help by absorbing excess water and making the stool more formed.
Interesting. Now, dietary changes seem to be a really major focus in these sources.
They really are. And this ties right back to that gut microbiota connection we discussed. A lot of people with IBS find that specific foods definitely trigger or worsen their symptoms. The sources state that food intolerances or sensitivities are reported by about 20% of adults in general, often related to carbohydrates. There's a quote from Kulol simply advising people to avoid junk food, which is probably good advice generally.
Yeah. An exclusion diet is one approach mentioned for trying to pinpoint individual food triggers.
Yes. The idea is you temporarily eliminate a list of common potential culprits, things like wheat, dairy, soy, eggs, sometimes certain meats, beans, nightshade vegetables like tomatoes, peppers, citrus fruits, caffeine.
And you eat safer alternatives instead.
Right. Things like rice, millet, quinoa, maybe rice milk, fish, lamb, certain nuts and seeds like pine nuts or flax, and a range of generally well-tolerated vegetables and non-citrus fruits. It takes planning, shopping, finding recipes. The sources mention you might feel a bit rough initially. Fatigue, headaches, muscle pain, possibly due to withdrawal from certain foods or caffeine, but that should pass. The goal is to see if symptoms improve significantly on the restricted diet, and then you carefully reintroduce foods one by one to see which ones cause problems. Maria is quoted identifying white grains and carbonated drinks as definite triggers for her.
Okay. And the sources dedicate quite a bit of space to FOD maize. Can you unpack that a bit?
Sure. FOD maize stands for fermentable oligosaccharides, disaccharides, monosaccharides, and polyols. Catchy, huh?
Not really. What are they in simple terms?
They're basically types of short-chain carbohydrates that are not well absorbed in our small intestine. So they travel down to the large intestine relatively intact.
And then what happens?
Down there, the gut bacteria ferment them. This fermentation process produces gas. And for people with sensitive guts, like in IBS, this extra gas production can lead to bloating, wind, abdominal pain, and altered bowel habits, all classic IBS symptoms.
So the idea is to reduce these fermentable carbs.
Exactly. A low FODMAP diet aims to do just that. And the sources cite studies showing it can lead to significant improvement for a lot of people with IBS, up to 86% in some studies mentioned.
What kinds of foods are high in FODMAPs?
Common examples given include lactose in dairy products, fructose found in high amounts in fruits like apples, pears, mangoes, and also in honey and high fructose corn syrup, sorbitol, a sugar alcohol found in some fruits and used as an artificial sweetener, and fructans, which are found in wheat, rye, onions, garlic, and some vegetables and legumes.
And low FODMA foods.
Things like lactose-free dairy or hard cheeses, fruits like bananas, blueberries, oranges, grapes, kiwi fruit, vegetables like bamboo shoots, carrots, celery, green beans, lettuce, parsnips, pumpkin. It's quite a specific list.
It's complex to follow.
It really can be initially. The sources strongly recommend working with a registered dietitian who specializes in FODM maps or using a very reputable, detailed book or app if you're considering trying it. It's usually done in phases: elimination, reintroduction, and then personalization.
Okay. What about prebiotics and probiotics? They get mentioned a lot in relation to gut health.
They do. Prebiotics are essentially types of fiber that act as food for our beneficial gut bacteria. The sources note they can affect gut transit time, but might cause some initial windiness for some people.
And probiotics.
Those are live bacteria themselves, taken with the aim of populating the gut with beneficial strains, often suggested after a course of antibiotics, for example. The sources mention that people with IBS sometimes show lower levels of certain good bacteria like lactobacilli and bifidobacteria, which seem to have anti-inflammatory effects, while potentially having higher levels of others like E. coli or salmonella, which are more associated with IBD and IBS.
So do the studies show probiotics actually help IBS?
The evidence presented in the sources suggests they can be better than placebo, especially for symptoms like pain and diarrhea, but perhaps less so for constipation. However, the effects are described as often being modest, and you generally need to keep taking them indefinitely as they don't tend to permanently colonize the gut.
Any specific types mentioned?
The sources mention studies focusing on lactobacilli and bifidobacteria strains. Probiotic yogurts are also mentioned, with one study showing reduced pain and symptoms. Sometimes the advice is to take prebiotics and probiotics together, a symbiotic approach.
Interesting. Flavonols are another dietary component discussed. Where do we find those?
They're compounds found in plants. Good sources mentioned are cocoa and dark chocolate, especially over 70% cocoa, apples, pomegranates, red grapes, tea, especially green and black, and even red wine in moderation.
And how might they help IBS?
They're known to have anti-inflammatory properties. The link to IBS in the sources seems to be via their potential positive effect on the gut microbiota, similar perhaps to prebiotics. A study using high cocoa drinks is cited as showing improvements in microbiota diversity. A specific product, Choco Crew, is mentioned as being high in flavonols and low in fat.
So it's not just about general antioxidant benefits, but a specific potential effect on the gut environment.
That seems to be the connection made, yes.
Yeah.
Sarah is quoted saying she finds cocoa and black tea help really well with her symptoms.
Okay. And lastly, on diet fiber. We're always told fiber is good for us, but the source material has a more nuanced take for IBS, doesn't it?
It does. Fiber is definitely important for overall gut health, feeding the microbiota, helping reduce inflammation. Western diets are often low in it, but the type of fiber seems to really matter in IBS.
Soluble versus insoluble.
Exactly. Soluble fiber dissolves in water to form a gel-like substance. It tends to slow digestion down. Think oats, psyllium husk, barley, beans, lentils, many fruits and vegetables. Insoluble fiber doesn't dissolve. It adds bulk and can speed things up, having more of a laxative effect. Think wheat bran, whole grains, nuts, seeds, the skins of root vegetables.
And the surprising finding for IBS.
The sources highlight a study where soluble fiber, specifically psyllium, were shown to significantly improve overall IBS symptoms, but insoluble fiber, particularly coarse wheat bran, actually worsened symptoms for a significant number of participants with IBS.
So the standard advice to just load up on bran might actually backfire for some people with IBS.
It seems so, according to this study. The recommendation derived is to focus on soluble fiber sources like oat-based products, fruits and vegetables, ensure you drink plenty of water, and maybe keep coffee intake moderate.
That's a really practical distinction. Okay, moving beyond diet and medications, the sources put a huge emphasis back on that mind-body connection and specific techniques to manage it.
Absolutely. Given the clear link established between stress, anxiety, fear, and IBS symptoms via that BGA-HPA axis, these therapies are presented as key tools for managing that connection.
Clinical hypnosis, or more specifically gut-directed hypnotherapy, gets highlighted as being particularly well-researched for IBS.
Yes, very much so. It involves guiding someone into a hypnotic state. And the sources are careful to clarify what that means. It's not about being asleep or losing control. It's described more as an enhanced state of concentration and relaxation, maybe similar to being deeply engrossed in a book or movie or daydreaming. Your mind is focused and more receptive to helpful suggestions. Hypnotherapist Ian Jackson is quoted saying, "Under hypnosis, the client is actually given back control."
Interesting. The Manchester approach is mentioned as a specific protocol.
It is. Developed over years, now typically involves around 12 sessions. It combines general relaxation techniques like progressive muscle relaxation and calming imagery with specific suggestions directed at the gut.
What kind of suggestion?
Things like imagining the gut calming down, maybe visualizing it changing from a turbulent roller coaster to a smooth, predictable country drive, or using the image of placing a warm, controlling hand on the abdomen. Later sessions also work on addressing the fear and avoidance behaviors linked to symptoms. Patients usually get recordings to practice at home between sessions.
And there's another one mentioned, the North Carolina protocol.
Yes, that's another structured approach, typically 7 sessions over 12 weeks. It focuses on 5 core components: altering attention away from symptoms, changing the perception of symptoms, enhancing a sense of control, promoting the idea of the bowel being immune to stress, and using imagery for normal gut function. They use techniques like eye fixation and relaxation to induce the trance state. Studies cited for both approaches show really high success rates, over 80% improvement reported in some.
Impressive. The sources even give tips on finding a qualified therapist, like checking registrations and asking about their specific experience with IBS.
Definitely important. Cognitive behavioral therapy, CBT, is another major psychological therapy discussed.
Which is more of a structured problem-solving talking therapy.
Exactly. It can be done individually with a therapist or sometimes through guided self-help programs or books. For IBS, common components include education about the stress-IBS link, learning specific stress management skills, monitoring thoughts and feelings around flare-ups, practicing relaxation techniques like progressive relaxation, breathing exercises, imagery, and something called cognitive restructuring.
What does that involve?
It's about identifying, challenging, and changing those unhelpful, often automatic negative thought patterns that can make symptoms feel worse or lead to avoidance.
And it sounds quite active, like it involves homework.
It usually does. You might be asked to keep detailed thought records, track your symptoms alongside your thoughts and feelings, practice relaxation daily, or even deliberately test out feared situations in a planned way to challenge your assumptions and reduce the associated anxiety. Studies show it's effective for improving IBS symptoms, as well as associated anxiety and depression. Group CBT has also shown benefits.
Mindfulness is also presented as a really valuable approach.
Yes, this is all about cultivating present moment awareness, learning to observe your thoughts, feelings, and bodily sensations as they arise, but without judging them or getting swept away by them.
How does that work in practice?
You might focus on a specific anchor, like your breath or the physical sensation of your feet on the floor. When your mind inevitably wanders off into worries or planning, you gently notice that's happened. Thinking. And kindly bring your attention back to your anchor over and over again.
And the benefit for IBS?
Regular practice, often daily, like 45 minutes mentioned in one context, helps build mental resilience and emotional regulation. It's thought to positively influence the HPA axis, the BGA function, and even immune responses over time. Studies cited show significant reductions in IBS symptom severity compared to standard care or just being in a support group.
The source gives some nice, simple exercises you can try at home, too.
Yeah, like really immersing yourself in a mundane task. The example is washing up. Truly focus on the warmth of the water, the slippery feel of the soap, the sound of the plates, the smell, instead of letting your mind churn over worries.
Or really looking at an everyday object, like a pen or a leaf, as if you're an alien seeing it for the first time, noticing all its details without labeling or judging.
Exactly. Or using prompts during the day. Maybe every time you sit down, you pause for a moment to notice, where am I? What am I doing? How am I feeling emotionally right now? What physical sensations are present in my body? Just a brief check-in.
These sound like small things, but practiced regularly, they build that muscle of awareness.
And combining them with those breathing techniques we'll touch on makes them even more powerful for managing stress and physical discomfort.
Speaking of thinking patterns, the sources specifically tackle cognitive strategies for dealing with negative thinking, particularly catastrophizing.
Yes, that's the tendency to jump to the absolute worst-case scenario and feel completely overwhelmed and powerless. The example given is someone invited to a concert.
Right. And the catastrophic thought spiral might be, what if I desperately need the toilet during the performance? What if I can't get out? What if I have an accident in public? Everyone will see. It will be humiliating. I can't possibly go.
Exactly that kind of snowballing fear. The source points out that while the fear feels incredibly real and convincing in the moment, it's essentially your imagination running riot, fueled by anxiety.
So how do you counter that?
First step is to acknowledge it is an anxious thought, not necessarily a prediction of the future. Use calming breathing techniques immediately to activate your parasympathetic nervous system, the body's rest and digest mode. Then, actively engage with the fear by playing the what-if game, but turn it into a constructive planning exercise.
Okay, so what if I go to the concert? Becomes, how can I plan to make going to the concert manageable?
Precisely. Plan A. Practice relaxation techniques beforehand. Avoid known trigger foods that day. Tell your companion you have IBS and might need to slip out. Check the venue map online where are the toilets, especially accessible ones. Ask for an aisle seat near the exit when booking. Get one of those can't wait cards from the IBS network website, the ibsnetwork.org is mentioned, to show staff if needed.
And then tackle the next what if. What if I still feel I might lose control?
Plan B. Assemble that emergency pack we'll discuss later. Carry it discreetly. Just knowing you have it can dramatically reduce anxiety and challenge the catastrophic thoughts directly. Okay, worst case, I might have to leave. It's not ideal, but it's not the end of the world. What strangers think doesn't actually define me. My IBS is part of my life, but it doesn't have to rule it.
This proactive planning makes the feared outcome less likely because you're less anxious, and it gives you a sense of control back. Emily is quoted saying something really powerful. When I stopped worrying was when this really changed for me. These things feature in my life rather than rule it.
It really shows the power of shifting that mindset. Breathing techniques are mentioned repeatedly as vital, not just for general anxiety, but for managing acute symptoms or even panic attacks.
Because they directly influence the nervous system and that BGHPA axis?
Yes, they help switch off the fight or flight response and activate the calming rest and digest response. Simple techniques are given.
Like breathing in slowly through the nose for a count of 4, gently holding for 2, breathing out slowly through the nose for 4, gently holding for 2, and repeating that cycle.
That's a good basic one. And also diaphragmatic breathing, retraining yourself to breathe deeply from the diaphragm muscle at the base of your lungs, rather than taking shallow breaths from your chest, which often happens when we're stressed or anxious.
How do you practice that?
The source suggests placing one hand on your upper chest and the other gently on your belly. As you inhale slowly and deeply through your nose for a count of, say, 3, focus on letting your belly rise so the bottom hand lifts more than the top hand. Then exhale slowly through your mouth or nose for a count of 3, maybe silently saying the word relax to yourself, feeling your belly gently fall. Repeat that for several minutes. It refers to figures 5 and 6 in the source material showing this.
And this type of breathing is particularly helpful during panic attacks. The sources mentioned those can feel terrifyingly like a heart attack.
They really can. Palpitations, chest pain, feeling breathless, dizzy. A key feature of panic attacks is often hyperventilation or overbreathing.
Breathing too fast.
Yes. And when you breathe too fast and shallowly, you blow off too much carbon dioxide, CO2. It's actually the resulting low level of CO2 in your blood that causes many of the physical symptoms, the feeling of breathlessness, even though you're breathing fast, pins and needles, lightheadedness. Panic makes you hyperventilate, and hyperventilation symptoms fuel the panic. Another vicious cycle.
So the key is to regulate the breathing to break that cycle.
Exactly. The quickest way mentioned is simply holding your breath for about 10 to 15 seconds, then breathing normally for a bit, and repeating that hold 3 or 4 times. This helps build your CO2 levels back up. The old paper bag trick works on the same principle by rebreathing CO2, but the source notes holding your breath is less conspicuous in public.
And longer term.
Regular practice of those cognitive techniques, mindfulness, gentle exercise, and especially daily diaphragmatic breathing helps make you less prone to hyperventilating and having panic attacks in the first place.
Okay. Now, for practical coping when you're out and about, the sources suggest some really concrete tools. The emergency pack comes up again.
Yes, described almost as a comfort blanket. The idea is that simply having it with you, even if you never need to use it, significantly reduces anxiety about what-if scenarios.
What goes in it?
Essentials mentioned include any quick-acting medications you use, like Buscopan for cramps or anti-diarrhea tablets, flushable wet wipes, a spare pair of underwear, and maybe a small sealable plastic bag just in case. Perhaps a little card with reminders of breathing exercises, or having relaxation apps or music readily available on your phone.
And the sources try to normalize carrying it.
Yeah, suggesting men can use a small, discreet bag And comparing it to how women routinely carry sanitary products, it's just practical preparation. Its presence alone lowers the stress level.
And for actually accessing toilets when out, the radar key is mentioned for the UK.
That's part of Disability Rights UK's National Key Scheme, NKS. It gives you access to thousands of locked, public accessible toilets across the country. Using this key, perhaps in combination with a toilet finder smartphone app, can be incredibly empowering.
And the can't wait card.
That's available from the IBS network, the ibsnetwork.org. It's a card you can discreetly show to staff in shops, restaurants, etc., to explain you have a medical condition and urgently need to use their facilities, even if they're not usually available to the public. They also offer a travel version for different languages. Planning routes using a toilet finder app is also recommended to reduce travel anxiety.
Okay, stepping back a bit for a broader view, the sources mention a study by Cassidy and colleagues looking at how patients themselves think about their IBS.
Yes, and the interesting finding was that patients often focus less on the complex underlying biological causes or theoretical models, and much more on the practicalities. Identifying their personal triggers like specific foods or stressful situations, and figuring out what strategies help them manage those triggers and the resulting symptoms day to day.
So the lived experience knowledge, knowing what makes their IBS worse and what helps them cope, was more important to them than the exact why.
That seemed to be the main takeaway from that study, yes.
Yeah.
Practical, actionable knowledge was key for them.
And just briefly revisiting the potential causes discussed throughout the material.
The sources kind of recap the main physical mechanisms floated. Disturbances in the gut microbiota, maybe from antibiotics or infections, the impact of stress via the BGA-HPA axis, evidence of low-grade inflammation in the gut lining, sometimes increased numbers of mast cells near gut nerves, which are involved in immune responses and pain signaling, potential alterations in gut permeability or leakiness. SIBO, small intestinal bacterial overgrowth, is mentioned as sometimes being implicated, though the source notes the evidence is inconsistent. And of course, the increased risk associated with coexisting conditions like depression, anxiety, sleep problems, and other psychiatric issues is noted again.
The role of trauma, particularly early life trauma, comes up again in this context too.
Yes, studies are cited linking severe stress experienced early in life, things like wartime famine or significant abuse, sexual, emotional, with an increased risk of developing various chronic illnesses later on, including IBS.
And the sources distinguish between big T and little t trauma.
Right. Big T trauma refers to major, often single, overwhelming events. Little t trauma describes the more cumulative impact of ongoing, less intense but still damaging experiences, like chronic emotional neglect, persistent bullying, or living in a highly stressful family environment.
And the absolutely crucial insight here, according to the sources, is that these experiences don't just leave psychological scars, do they?
No, this is a really major point emphasized. Traumatic stress, whether big T or cumulative little t, appears to be able to physically sensitize the gut itself and the entire BGA-HPA stress response system.
How does that work? An analogy is used, isn't it?
Yes, like being exposed to a sudden, painfully loud noise. Afterwards, even normal sounds might seem jarring or overwhelming for a while because your auditory system is temporarily hypersensitive. Similarly, early or chronic stress might leave the gut-brain axis in a state of hyperreactivity, over-responding to later, even milder stressors. Chronic work stress or relationship difficulties can potentially have a similar sensitizing effect over time.
And there's evidence for actual physical changes resulting from this.
Yes, the sources mention animal studies showing that trauma and chronic stress can lead to measurable changes in the gut lining, potentially increasing its permeability, that leakiness we talked about. And those mast cells, the immune cells near the gut nerves, involved in inflammation and pain. Their activity and numbers can also be affected by stress and trauma. Increased mast cells near gut nerves have been linked to worse pain perception in people with IBS. So this provides a tangible biological link, a physical mechanism connecting a person's psychological history and current emotional state directly to their physical gut symptoms.
That's incredibly important. It really bridges that old mind-body divide in a concrete physiological way. Finally, the sources offer some advice for friends and family. How can they best support someone living with IBS?
Patience seems to be the number one thing. Understanding that symptoms can fluctuate wildly and unpredictably. Being willing to adapt plans, maybe suggesting a quiet night in instead of a big meal out if the person is having a tough time.
And just listening without minimizing.
Yes, being prepared to hear about their struggles without dismissing them or offering simplistic solutions. And crucially, understanding that the low mood or fatigue often associated with chronic illness isn't necessarily just psychological.
Right, the inflammation connection again.
Exactly. The sources point out that the inflammatory process itself involves the release of substances called cytokines. These are signaling molecules that help coordinate the immune response, but they can also directly affect the brain and contribute to feelings of malaise, fatigue, and low mood, similar to how you feel generally unwell when you have the flu, which is also driven by an inflammatory response. So the low mood can have a real biological component linked to the illness itself.
Okay, so wrapping up this really thorough exploration of the material you provided on IBS, what's the overarching summary message?
Well, it's undeniably clear from these sources that IBS is a complex, genuinely distressing condition. It's difficult to cope with, from the often long road to diagnosis to finding treatments that actually work.
And the invisible nature adds another layer of difficulty.
Absolutely. Because the individual symptoms, bloating, pain, altered bowel habits, are things many people experience occasionally. The chronic and severe nature of them in IBS is often misunderstood or trivialized. This can lead to a profound lack of understanding and support, leaving people feeling isolated, frustrated, angry, and hurt.
So the book, the source material, isn't offering a simple fix or a magic pill.
Not at all. It's positioned more as a comprehensive toolkit. It aims to provide detailed, evidence-based information on the diagnosis process, the wide array of potential treatments, medical, dietary, psychological, and practical strategies for integrating these approaches, things like diet modification, stress reduction, mind-body therapies, to help individuals limit the condition's impact on their lives.
It's about empowerment through knowledge, finding what works for you.
Exactly. Giving people the information and tools they need to navigate their own path towards better management and hopefully a better quality of life, recognizing that the journey will be unique for each person.
Well, that was certainly a deep dive. We've journeyed through so much based on your sources, from defining the core symptoms and tracing the shift in understanding IBS away from it's all in your mind towards this complex biopsychosocial reality.
Exploring that fascinating two-way street of the gut-brain axis, how stress and even past trauma can leave tangible physical marks on the gut's sensitivity and function.
Right. Then digging into the diagnostic process, the crucial role of symptom tracking, and the huge range of management tools available, from dietary approaches like FODPs and fiber adjustments to medications, and those really powerful mind-body techniques like hypnotherapy, CBT, and mindfulness.
Your sources really painted a picture of just how multifaceted IBS is, but also, importantly, how many different avenues exist for people to explore in finding relief and improving their daily lives. It really underscores that idea of finding the unique combination of strategies that works for you.
So what does this all point to? Here's a final thought, something for you to maybe mull over based on everything we've discussed from these materials. If we accept, as the sources strongly suggest, that early life stresses, and even the steady accumulation of modern life's chronic little t traumas, can physically sensitize our gut-brain axis, potentially contributing to conditions like IBS. What does that imply about the impact of our typical modern lifestyles on everyone's gut health?
That constant low-level stress, the chronic sleep deprivation many people experience, the highly processed diets, the information overload.
Exactly. If these things can subtly, cumulatively nudge our gut-brain systems towards hypersensitivity over time, what does that mean for how we need to think about health itself? Maybe it's not just about treating symptoms when they arise, but about proactively creating personal and societal environments that genuinely support and nurture that fundamental mind-body-gut-brain connection for long-term well-being.